Hi. Today we're going to talk about how an autistic person's senses impact the world they live in and impact the world those around them live in, and what we can all do to help make the world a little bit better place for all of us. So stay tuned for that. Well, welcome back once again to Living with Autism. I'm glad you joined me. As I said, I want to talk about how the senses of an autistic person impact their life, how they impact our lives, and by extension, how they impact the lives of those around us. And it's kind of ironic that I'm talking about this because it's been, as I got ready to record, my neighbors are walking around and there's thumping and squeaking and nobody's like doing anything. There's just all these noises. The moment I pushed record, the ice cream man walks by and is ding, 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 or whatever he is. Maybe he's selling something else, but all these noises that are going on. So I just thought that was kind of funny, and I wondered if I should record because I don't want all these outside sounds to impact the quality of the video that I can produce, but at the same time I have to, it's the world I live in, right? And so there's a real correlation to this that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But before I get into that, let's step back and talk about what I said. How do an autistic person's senses very often impact the world that they live in? Well, autistics commonly have either a hyper or hypo-sensitivity. And I think sometimes they go hand in hand, that in one area or at one time, it might be hypersensitive. For example, touch. Somebody touches someone, it might be jarring. But at the same time, something like a weighted blanket or a tight hug in the right circumstances might help. So being touched lightly and having that being jarring, that's hypersensitivity. You're overly sensitive. And the other, needing extra pressure, extra something, right? That's sort of a hyposensitivity. And we commonly think of the 5 senses, but there are really 7 senses that we can look at if we're talking about, this probably applies to each and every one of us, but when we talk about hyper and hyposensitivity, oversensitive and not very sensitive at all, we actually talk about 7 senses. And that is not only sight, smell, taste, hearing, and touch, but it is also what is called the vestibular sense, which has to do with your balance, as I almost fell backwards. And your proprioceptive is a big fancy word. They call it body awareness. It's kind of like spatial awareness. It's how aware I am of where I am in my surroundings. And so what happens when let's say the vestibular, the balance sense is off, it leads to what can often be in autistics is there's a clumsiness. It's looked at that way. This body awareness, spatial awareness, bumping into things. And depending on your level of autism, depending on your level of sensitivity disorder, if you want to call it that, and you might not even be autistic and experience these things, but depending on how that works, there may be more or less extreme, and it may be more or less extreme at different times. And so what happens is that all of us recognize the senses, right? We may not focus on them at the moment, but we can see, and there's light coming in, and we hear. Maybe it's the sound of my voice, maybe a fan in the background, maybe a car going by, a dog barking, all these things, right? We're feeling things. We're not thinking about it, but we can maybe, if we think about it, feel our clothes on our body, feel the pencil in our hand, or what the desk or the keyboard might feel like, all these things. We may or may not smell things around. Sometimes there's no smell, maybe sometimes there are very strong smells. And when we taste things, these things, we have things we like and we don't like. So sensory issues are not something that are exclusive to autistics or really somehow different. It's what happens and the way these things process. And I could try to give you all kinds of scientific or technical things that maybe I don't even understand, and in ways that everyone is different. But what I'd like to do is just kind of share with you some of my particular issues, the way this impacts my life, to give all of us maybe a better idea of what these things might mean. Because, and I say all of us because as I have thought about this, wrote out some notes, studied this a bit in scientific terms, not just in personal terms today, there's a lot of things that I have learned as well. And so let me just give you examples of some ways that sensitivity to my senses impacts me. I often deal with what is sensory overload. And amazingly now, my neighbors are quiet. No one's walking around. Again, they weren't doing anything. It's just movement, right? People can't just naturally sit still. I can't expect them to always be sitting still. But there's the same thing, right? Activity is taking place. People are going places, so their car drives. They may have a louder car than others. Somebody needs to do some work, so there's a hammer banging. Maybe there's a chainsaw going off. A dog is being a dog, so he's barking. Someone is going by on a skateboard. All these different kinds of things that go on. And for me, it can be like living with neighbors on one side and above me can be an issue. I remember when our neighbors were not long here, their son, great kids, but they're active, right? And he's probably more active than, I don't know, is he more active than a normal 9-year-old or however old he is, but he's running and jumping and banging, and I don't know, she has a little trampoline that she tried to put for them to get some exercise out, but without banging on the floor too much. And I remember one day it was just especially hard, and I just couldn't take it anymore. And we hadn't really, I don't know if my wife had, but I hadn't really communicated much with him at all. And there was just this banging and banging. I stood on top of this piano bench that I'm sitting on now, and I just slammed on the ceiling as hard as I could, because I couldn't take it anymore. And nobody was doing anything wrong. It was just that experience. My neighbor on the other side has music that she likes to listen to, and I don't always hear the entirety of the music, and I just hear the bass line maybe, and her style of music is not necessarily my style of music. And so these things, they just kind of like, and they drive me nuts, and I don't know what to do. Meanwhile, I live in a house, there's 4 of us. I have a wife and 2 little girls, 8 and 5, and so there's activity, there's running and playing and talking and laughing and fighting and all the different stuff that takes place. My little girls are homeschooled, even outside of the situation that's been going on. But so we've all been in the house because of everything that's been going on, preparing to move. We've all just been here. And it's been that way for quite a while since we returned from the United States, from Ecuador, to the United States. And so I just sometimes get all this chaos, all this noise, all these things going off. My phone, my ringer is almost always off. Even though I would be interested in answering, it's not that I don't want to necessarily talk to someone, but the phone is so hard for me. It's so intrusive to me. It's the most ridiculous device. It's very convenient, but I have this device that says no matter what I'm doing, anyone who has this number can interrupt me at any time with this piercing sound. And it's just kind of crazy. When we lived in Ecuador, I disconnected the doorbell because the doorbell was so abrasive, and because of the culture there, people would sometimes ring the doorbell multiple times. I know you're in there kind of thing, and it didn't mean anything. It was the cultural style. And so all these different kinds of things go on. I could go on and on and on. I'll give you a couple more examples. Anybody that knows me probably recognizes that I almost always have sunglasses. And if they see me inside, a lot of people see me inside, I have sunglasses on the back of my head. I have eyes in the back of my head. But when I go out, it pretty much doesn't matter. Unless it's like really like dark out, I'll be wearing sunglasses. When it's dusk, when it's cloudy, when it's bright sun, it doesn't matter. All those times I'm wearing sunglasses because the sun just is so overpowering. We went and took a car trip to Yellowstone many, many years ago, my wife and I. And I remember driving late at night, and there were just these car lights over and over, and it was raining, and I ended up putting on sunglasses, and I've dealt with headaches from car headlights, these new halogen lights, and I wish that there was a way to just all street lights and cars just use like their parking lights, their running lights, no headlights, because they're so invasive to me. They're so intense. And being bumped into, this is the last example I think I'll give. If someone bumps into me, just accidentally, little bump, man, it feels like, I don't know, punched in the face or more. It is so strong. It is so personal. It is so like emotional, like you've insulted me is what it feels like. And the person had zero intent to do it. That happens here. It's a little bit better maybe with my family. Depends on who it is. My little daughter, who's 5, bumps into me. She's little, so it doesn't move me as much as opposed to, say, my wife. And there's just not a lot of space. We are in a small 2-bedroom apartment, and so these things happen. Okay? This is a part of life. And that's what goes on. There's the challenges of living in this world, because what can I do? We live in an apartment. Do I need to try to live on a farm out somewhere in the woods in Montana, Idaho, the sort of live off the land, off the grid, kind of a separate from everything? Maybe that would help, but that's not the life that I'm called to. And so I live in a city, and there's just activity. People have cars, they need to get places. People have lives. I talk to my family, they want to talk. Everyone around wants to talk. And so there becomes a real challenge, though, for living in a world when our sensitivity level to our, if I refer to them as 7 senses, does not mesh with the world around us. Because I might like, and it depends, right? Maybe I like a different style of music than a member of my family. I wanted a different volume at a different time. And there are these challenges that go on. And for all of us, we may have our preferences, but a challenge can be for me that these preferences are so intense that I find myself sort of plugging my ears or trying to do something to get away from all of this sensory overload. And so this is one of the things that people with autism have a strong tendency to experience in some way. An extra sensitivity. Maybe they're a little bit clumsier in our ideas. Autistic people are often later in life to drive. And so we're just all different. So now we talk about what we can do. How I mentioned that I wanted to not just tell you, I didn't want to get real technical. This is what hypersensitivity and sensitivity disorder, and it's not really a recognized mental disorder, and I'm giving you this scientific silly, I'm giving it to you in a silly way, because that's not what I wanted this video to be about. I never want these things to be about something technical. I want them to have technical information, but somehow still be personal. So I relate to you, my experiences, but your experiences, and as an autistic person or someone exploring the question of whether or not you are autistic, an autistic person that you know, or just autistics who are around you, whether you know it or not, their experiences are going to be different than mine. And it's very clear they'll be different from mine because I know that mine are different at different times. There's times when it's okay. And there's times when it's too much and I have to go somewhere, sit down, maybe put on some headphones, quiet, listen to some, I can't even have quiet sometimes, so listen to music, something I can control. So when we live in a world with so much stimuli, so many stimuli, I can't go, I don't want to live in a mental institution in a padded, silent room. That is not a good way to live. My wife thankfully still wants me around. My kids thankfully still want me around. This isn't a feasible way of doing things. So what do we do? How do we deal with this in life? Well, the first key is for us to recognize what our challenges are, what our particular issues are, what our particular needs are. What are the things that cause me challenges? This is something that as I'm filming this, going over this, I'm thinking about. I need to be more aware of what are the issues that can come up. Because when these sensory issues come up, they tend to cause conflict. They tend to cause problems. And either I internalize this conflict and maybe my family sees it from a distance and says, I better stay away. Or in a worst case, it becomes externalized somehow, and my frustration and my struggle then is poured out on my family, unfortunately, because I'm telling my kids to be quiet when they're not doing anything, or I just need this silence. And so I have to recognize what my challenges are. We need to be careful and recognize what potential challenges are and look for those signs in those around us. Look at somebody. What might be their challenge? Look, do they look like they're struggling? Why are they struggling? What is going on? And this applies obviously way beyond hyper or hyposensitivity. It applies way beyond sounds and lights and all these other things. It's just looking at people and looking to recognize what their challenges are, looking internally and looking at what our challenges are. And then the issue is not fixing them. It's not trying to have some sort of sensory therapy where you're bombarded with lights and sounds and all kinds of other things in an attempt to sort of get you used to it or something, right? After you've been in the Turkish prison, everything else is easy. So this idea that we make it just so intense so that life becomes easy, that's a dumb idea, okay? But we need to recognize and figure out, how do we prepare for those things? What do I do when I'm sensing my need to have less stimuli going on? What do I do so that I can help myself do better, and by extension help those around me not enjoy life better because they don't have to worry about dad, or they don't have to be like dad is running over me or telling me to sit just so and be, because I'm struggling. The same way with others, when we see people, look, recognize, what can we do? And there's only so much I can do. I'm not suggesting we all should go out and try to get silent cars. We shouldn't have signs in the front yard that says autistic person lives here and put our car into neutral as we drift by. We're going to live life, and it's important to live life. I don't want my challenges to inhibit the lives of those around me. But I do want all of us, to consider each other, both from our needs and how they're going to impact our moods, the way we treat others, but also what other people's needs are. Being aware of those things, being understanding, encouraging each other, which I think beyond anything, that's what I want this channel to be about, learning how we understand each other better, how we encourage, support, and lift each other up in a better way so the world is better for all of us. One last thing, I'm going to link in the description a video, assuming at least to a page, I hope I can link the video, of a project that was done, a senior project that was done of some university students, to give an idea of what sensory overload might be like for an autistic child in this case. And so if you're interested, you might check that out, see maybe what it feels like, compare and say, hey, is this what life feels like to me? Is this what I see others do? And help us understand each other. Because as we understand ourselves and understand each other, we can really make the world better for all of us. And that might sound really sappy, and I'm not that kind of sappy person in that sense, but really caring about each other, thinking about each other. How can we help each other? Not allow ourselves to get walked on, not bend over to everybody else's wants or needs, but how can we, while still understanding our needs, be careful and understanding of the needs of others. Well, I hope this was enlightening to you. I hope it challenged you maybe in some way about yourself, about others. How can we be more understanding, recognize what's going on in ourselves and in those around us? I look forward to seeing you again next Friday. Until then, take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.